There are moments when history turns not with a roar, but with a breath held in silence. Times when the fate of many rests not in the hands of the powerful, but in the quiet resolve of someone the world barely notices. We often expect God to move through crowds and crowns, yet again and again, He steps into the stillness, into ordinary places, into lives that seem far from the center of the story. And it is there, in the unnoticed spaces, that courage reveals its truest form. In the days when fear ruled the land and oppression felt endless, Israel groaned under the weight of Sisera's iron chariots. For 20 long years, his army crushed hope, and the people cried out to God for relief. God answered through Deborah, a prophet and judge, who spoke with clarity and faith, calling Barak to rise and lead Israel into battle. The promise was sure. God would give victory. Yet even as the armies gathered, it became clear that this deliverance would not unfold in the expected way, because God had already prepared an unlikely hand to finish what warriors would begin. As the battle raged and Sisera's forces collapsed under the hand of God, the feared commander fled on foot, desperate to survive. He ran not toward a fortress, but toward the tent of Jael, a woman living on the edges of the conflict, part of a people at peace with Sisera's allies. To Sisera, her tent looked like refuge, a place of safety hidden from the chaos of war. To Jael, it was the moment when history knocked softly at her door. Jael welcomed Sisera with calm hospitality, covering him, offering him milk, and listening as he asked her to stand guard. Everything about the moment seemed ordinary, almost gentle, yet beneath the surface, Jael understood the weight of what stood before her. She knew who Sisera was and what he represented. She knew the suffering he had brought upon God's people. And in that quiet space, with no witnesses and no applause, she chose courage over comfort, obedience over safety, and alignment with God's purpose over personal risk. What followed was decisive and irreversible. Jael acted with resolve, ending Sisera's terror once and for all. When Barak arrived in pursuit, the battle was already finished, not on the battlefield, but in a tent. God's promise had been fulfilled, not through the strength of an army alone, but through the bold obedience of a woman who refused to let fear have the final word. In the Song of Deborah, Jael would be called blessed among women, her act remembered not for its violence, but for its faith-filled courage at a turning point in God's deliverance. The story of Jael reminds us that God's purposes are not limited by titles, gender, or visibility. He moves through those who are willing, even when they stand far from the spotlight. Jael did not seek recognition, yet she stepped fully into the moment God placed before her. Her story challenges the belief that significance is reserved for the loud or the powerful, showing instead that obedience in hidden places can reshape the destiny of nations. This account also teaches that courage often looks different than we imagine. Jael's bravery was not shouted on a battlefield. It was carried out in silence, with clarity of conviction. There was no time for consultation, no reassurance from others, only a decision made in the presence of God. In our own lives, we too face moments when faith requires action without applause, when doing what is right may feel lonely or costly, yet deeply aligned with God's will. There is also a lesson here about spiritual awareness. Jael recognized the moment for what it was. She understood that neutrality was not an option and that aligning with God's purpose mattered more than maintaining comfort or safety. Many opportunities for obedience pass quietly through our lives, disguised as interruptions or uncomfortable decisions. The story of Jael invites us to stay attentive to the presence of God, to recognize when He is calling us to act with courage, even when the cost feels high. In the end, Jael's story is not about brutality, but about bold faith at a decisive moment. It is about God choosing to work through someone unexpected to bring freedom to His people. It reminds us that deliverance does not always come through the means we predict, but it always comes through obedience. When the powerful fall and the quiet rise, we see again that God's strength is made visible through willing hearts. Jael's tent became the place where oppression ended and hope began anew. Her obedience echoes across generations, reminding us that when God invites us into His work, even the smallest spaces can become holy ground. And as we reflect on her story, we are left with a simple but searching question. When history quietly leans on our obedience, will we recognize the moment and trust God enough to act?